You are listening to The Insider with Brian Lloyd. The opinions expressed are that of the individuals and can sometimes be of an adult nature.
On today's Insider podcast, we're talking to Tommy Palotta, the director of Last Hijack, a new documentary that's out. Tommy, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you.
I suppose just to kind of start from the beginning, it's kind of an interesting subject matter in that, like, you're talking about Somali pirates, and of course all we really know of, you know, this whole Somali pirate crisis is from what we see on CNN and so on and so forth. Right. So my question is, what was it about this topic that made it so interesting for you to discuss, I suppose?
Yeah, it just was sort of, you know, every year, I feel bad I don't know what it is, but there's a list of underreported news stories that come out, sort of like the most censored stories of the year. Yeah. And I always find it fascinating. I'm a big fan of sort of alternative media and things like that. And this was actually several years ago, and I read about the pirates, and it was talking about the illegal fishing and the illegal waste dumping and all that stuff. And it did sort of seem conspiratorial that I hadn't heard this part of the story. And I just started asking myself the question, like, well, you know, what would is crime ever justified? In a way? And then I started to sort of research a little bit more into it, just out of curiosity, not really thinking about making a movie. But then I found out that Somali, I didn't know the history, had been a failed state for 20 years, meaning that it didn't have any central government. And I was sort of really fascinated by the idea of a society without a central government. And I sort of imagined it must be like sort of Mad Max or something.
Kind of post-apocalyptic or something.
Yeah, and so I just started doing more research, and then I was talking to my partner, Femke Volting, who's a co-director on it. And she said, yeah, that sounds like a great film, and, you know, we should do a hybrid. It should be like half animated, half live action. And I thought, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. You know, still hadn't become real to me yet. That seemed like a good idea. So all these sort of happy accidents just kept on happening. And then we started pitching it, and Ireland, the Irish Film Board, was kind of sort of first in. And so all of a sudden we were making a movie.
You said there that, like, you know, making it half animated, half documentary, that made sense to you.
Yeah.
How? Because, I mean, you have to admit, like, I mean, okay, fair enough, you look at something like Waltz with Bashir or something like that, it sort of lends itself to it or whatever. But, I mean, the idea of putting Somali pirates, something that is so real, that is so kind of prescient, or, you know, meshing the two genres, I mean, how did you kind of justify it, I suppose?
Well, I think that maybe was so wrong it was right. You know, that like juxtaposing those two different things sort of seemed like at an instinctive level good. And there's a practical level that we knew that we couldn't really film a piracy in action. You know, and we knew that there wasn't a lot of footage from the past that, you know, we could use. So initially the animation was sort of there as a safeguard to show something or recreate something that we wouldn't have access to. But the idea of the sort of like recreation in the documentary seems a bit tired in a way. Because we're all very sophisticated in terms of, like, you know, what's real and what's recreation and stuff like that. I think, like, when I was young and Errol Morris came out with The Thin Blue Line in the 80s, it was kind of huge. But then that became co-opted, and it's become part of our everyday visual syntax and the way that we tell stories and stuff. And animation, I think, is really hugely untapped in a storytelling medium. I mean, it's really for children right now. And so I'd been making movies that were for adults primarily, that were animated. And the movies that I had done in the past, like Scanner Darkly and Waking Life, and the shorts that I had made, before I did those movies, I was doing animated documentaries, and they were rotoscoped. And it always felt to me that there's sort of an untapped potential in telling a story with animation. And so we just thought, like, there's a need for it. It makes sense, and perhaps we could blend those two and make a hybrid, because actually the documentary form of itself, it's a very exciting stage. Like, it's sort of a genre that's lends itself to experimental narrative. And I always tell people it's like when I was growing up and I'd go to the record store, anything that didn't fit into like rock, country, or classical went to jazz.
That's where you'd go.
Go to jazz. So it's like, even if it wasn't like traditional jazz that we think, it's like, well, we don't know what it is, so we're going to put it in jazz. That's kind of documentary.
Captain Beefheart would be in like jazz.
So like documentary is exciting in that like for a long time, there was this sort of idea that documentaries were just sort of objective,
Yeah.
filmmaking. And as a filmmaker, I never really quite bought that. It's sort of like as soon as you point a camera somewhere, as soon as you make an edit, as soon as you ask a question, it's no longer objective. And it sort of seemed like it's a fun place to sort of really push the idea of, can you take things that you can use in narrative film, but then apply it to documentary? Can you do animation and blend it with live action successfully?
Yeah. It's just actually okay, right? And again, I know you've sort of answered that already, but I'll put it to you again anyway. I mean, you were saying that documentaries, in your opinion, are not objective in any kind of real way. In that, like, once you put a camera on it, once you kind of like measure it, it's no longer, like quantifiable and what have you. But on the other end of the spectrum, animation, we know that to be completely unreal. If you get what I'm saying, as in it's not like a physical thing, it's not a physical performance, it's something that has been crafted and so on and so forth. I mean, again, like, I suppose, like, I mean, why would you think that animation is so, in your mind, why does it, is it purely just because, the idea of a documentary is not objective, so therefore we're going to go the exact opposite direction with how we make it? Is that it?
Well, no, I mean, there's never like a conscious choice in that. Sometimes, a lot of times it's instinct, and then you get to ask questions and you got to try to sound like you know exactly what you're doing when you're doing it. But sometimes it's just sort of a feeling or a challenge to yourself, or and it leads to it. And I think the role of the animation in this film, it evolved as we were making the film. And a lot of times the exciting thing about a documentary is that you have to really plan a documentary.
Yeah.
Like, as much as you do any sort of feature narrative, and especially this one since it was being shot in Somalia. But also what's exciting about it is that whatever you think you're making and whatever story you think you're trying to tell, like, you can try to force it into that, but it has a way of taking its own shape and pushing back. Yeah. And you have to, like, I find myself even sometimes fighting against it and then remember, like, oh yeah, well, I'm fighting against it. It needs to be this. This is what the story is, There are many instances in this film which was like, it was extremely challenging in many different ways, that it sort of started to dictate itself. And the role of the animation, at first I said it was going to be the things that we couldn't
couldn't shoot,
we couldn't film. Like, what became more interesting to me as it went on was like, how can we show the sort of inner life of this character, Muhammad? How can we show a subjective viewpoint? But it didn't start out that way. It really started out like, we want to show the Somali perspective, not really thinking in terms of objective or subjective, but just that Somali perspective that I wasn't seeing in the Western media. And then as we went along to it, the animation started, sometimes it's recreation. Yeah. Sometimes it's the dreams. And sometimes it's just pure emotion.
It's interesting there. I mean, you mentioned that, and you've said this a couple of times about the fact that there was no sort of Western viewpoint on the Somali pirates, so on and so forth. But of course, we had Captain Phillips a couple of years ago. I mean, what's your take on Captain Phillips? Having lived with these Somali pirates and you've seen it firsthand. Yeah. I mean, how do you take something like Captain Phillips?
I didn't see Captain
Really?
Phillips. Yeah, but I kind of knew that if Hollywood was making a movie about Somali pirates, and it had Tom Hanks, that it wasn't going to give the Somali perspective, because like usually when it's a movie and you have a star of that caliber, then they're going to be the hero of the story. They're going to be the viewpoint of it. And every time, like, filmmaking is so much about perspective.
Of course.
Like when you're shooting that's what directors do. They really sort of navigate the perspective of the story. And so I thought that it would be good because it'll just sort of raise the profile and bring it up. But then when I saw the trailer and, and he goes like, I'm the captain now. And I was sort of like, man, that's like I wish I thought of that. And like some script doctor probably got paid $1 million. It was worth it for that one line because it was such an awesome line. It is, like that's sort of like
it's the real crux of the story. Like, I mean, see, this is it. Like, I mean, I watched your film, and as I was watching, I was okay, Somalia pirates. I've seen this with Captain Phillips. Obviously, the two are like difference between night and day because Captain Phillips is this real sort of, Hollywood thriller, and it's all that sort of thing. I mean, were you ever tempted to kind of aim it more towards that? That's what I mean. Sure, it's a documentary, but I mean, some of the stories that these guys talked about, isn't the bit where they pull up to the boat and they're like firing the ropes up onto it and they're trying to climb across. Like, I mean, that's a cool thing. Like, I mean, did you ever kind of think I could maybe take this and turn it into a more kind of standard thriller documentary, if you know that sort of way? I know that kind of sounds like bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, I've made a couple of movies. Every time I'm making a movie, it feels sort of very like poppy and standard to me while I'm making it. Yeah. And then like afterwards, I look back at it and I think like, oh well,
that's really esoteric. It's real,
sort of whatever. And maybe that's a good thing. And I mean, I think it's exciting. The thing that really struck me was like how unorganized it was, how much it wasn't like Ocean's 11. Like they don't target vessels. Like they go out there in a very small fishing, boat with very little supplies, and they hope that
they'll find something.
And if they don't, they die. Yeah. And that's why they do what they do. That's why you see this sort of like David versus Goliath type thing with this small thing going in there, because they're just fighting to survive. That's why they're going on that ship. And even in the movie, you hear them saying like, "Hey, you're only getting enough to go out. You're not getting enough to come back in."
Yeah.
And so, again, I think that it's inherently exciting, but again, I think the animation was what became more interesting was really the sort of the inner life versus the external life. You were never going to be able to compete against something like Hollywood and sort of Captain Phillips and stuff like that. That's what they do really, really well. But what they don't do well, and I think in terms of documentary, and what we're finding is that like people go see big movies and events and their experiences more than anything. But then people are really sort of connecting to these like intimate and real stories, and that's really why documentaries are having kind of a revival right now, because it's like there's room for both. There's room for like the big Star Wars, just to say that you went to go see Star Wars, but then you want to come home and you want to sort of be transported to a different place and understand the human condition, and that's really what storytelling is all about from the very beginning. When we just did it orally or, painted on walls and stuff. Yeah. It's about trying to explain the world around us and trying to make sense of it all and to comfort us, and to pass on knowledge to other people. But mostly it's really people trying to search and understand that world around us.
That's interesting. It's really interesting. Okay, I want to talk to you about rotoscoping because, I mean, you really did kind of pioneer it, didn't you? I mean, like you did like Wake and Life and you did a Scanner Darkly and now you've done this as well.
I mean, rotoscoping is one of the oldest animation techniques, really from the early 1900s, and the early Disney movies all had
Snow White, wasn't it?
Yeah, had rotoscoping and stuff. And so what happened there, like, I started out with filmmaking and was shooting on 16 millimeter film. And completely self-taught. I didn't go to film school or anything like that. And I made a feature film that took like 4 years of my life and depleted all of my money, resources, time, energy, favors. And I was just sort of like completely devastated by the end of it and just tired and it felt to me like that whole indie film movement, like it was after Quentin Tarantino and all that other stuff. Like there's such a huge shift, like when Pulp Fiction made over $100 million, it was sort of like that indie film movement kind of went away. It wasn't good enough to sort of make a movie and just get a couple of people in there. Suddenly independent film was big business. And I think that I'd met an animator named Bob Sabiston who had been making a short film and spent several years and was completely depleted and wanted to do something new and was interested in live action. And so we just got together and said like, hey, is there a way that we can sort of take the spontaneity of filmmaking, but the sort of the visual coolness of animation and bringing them together. And we assumed that there was a program that would just allow you to draw over things. You could film real people. You didn't have to write a script or anything like that. But there wasn't. He happened to be a programmer, so he wrote a really simple program that allowed people to basically just trace over those images. And that's sort of how it began. So we started making shorts like that. And I was friends with Richard Linklater.
Yeah, of course,
And then he was and I was using digital cameras, which at the time this is the 90s, so this was all very like new stuff. Before that, we now we have it all on our phone, which is great, but it wasn't like that then. So he was asking me about the digital cameras, and we started talking about what was going to become Waking Life, and he was really into lucid dreaming at that time, and it sort of was like, well, how do we show this in a way that you can sort of take the banality of these people talking, but sort of elevate it to become more surreal. Yeah. And then the work that I was doing in the animation made so much sense in a way, because like what I was doing was so influenced by him already, since I worked on Slacker, I was a PA on that and I was an actor on that. So, and he was such a big influence on me and Bob and everybody else who was sort of doing the animation, that it all sort of made sense to sort of go that way. Yeah. But at that time, it also was the birth of Pixar, right? Yeah. And and animated movies at that time cost like $100 million to make. They still cost even more than that.
Even more now, right? Yeah.
But what we were doing was sort of so garage, and it was, we developed it in my house, basically. Bob and I were just sort of doing it. And
tooling around.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
And so we were making shorts for no money and stuff like that. And so, like, even Waking Life, it cost about $1 million to make. And it came out at that time. And it was the first independently produced fully computer animated film, that got distribution in America. And it was so cool to sort of see this, like, $1 million film sort of competing
out
against
there.
These films that always had at least, I guess $100 million movie or whatever. It was really unheard of, and it was sort of fun. And we got to do whatever we wanted because it was so low budget.
You were just left to your own devices.
Yeah, there was no expectations about it. I mean, because it premiered at Sundance, and it sort of felt like people had never seen anything like it before.
They hadn't.
So
they really hadn't.
And it was sort of electric, and it was sort of cool, but like it all seemed so natural to us at that time that it was only at that moment when you could sort of feel that crowd and sort of feel like, oh, well, that their minds are being blown.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, we were rendering that to the last minute, and nobody had actually seen the final render all the way through.
So you were like, when you were at Sundance, that was your first time seeing it as well?
Well, the first time seeing it rendered to be projected, right? So we knew it worked on our computer at home,
of course,
but we didn't know if it would work through a big projector, through the format that we were showing at. And at one point, it sort of like froze for a second, I thought like, oh man, this is it. But then it like immediately went back on, and it was cool.
So if it froze, you'd be like, yeah, no, we totally planned that. That was all in
it was so small that I don't think anybody even noticed. It was just sort of, maybe
little blip.
Like, that I noticed. But, so... But also when we were doing the animation, when I was just working with Bob, this is before Waking Life, we were very conscious that we could sort of take a subject matter and what people were saying, and it would be sort of banal if it was like live action.
Yeah.
But because we were sort of playing with the visual aspects of it, it was sort of elevated and make it into something else. And that was a sort of big motivation in that was sort of like, how do you take the things that are very real, but then have sort of a very artificial cover. And again, that's that juxtaposition. You know, like how can you find what's human when it's sort of guided by a computer, or how can you find something real when it's obviously artificial? And there's something strange. I mean, I was always a big fan of The Simpsons, and sometimes I'd watch a Simpsons episode and I'd want to cry. And I would be like, okay, I'm watching this like brightly colored, crudely drawn figures, but I'm identifying with it and it's touching me in a way that's as real as any sort of real version of Family on TV.
Mother Simpson is always my favorite Simpsons. The one where Glenn Close played the mother and she comes back, she was the hippie. Like that that episode fucking floored me. The bit at the end where like she drives off and he's left sitting on the car and he's looking up at the stars.
Right.
That fucking floored me. Seriously. But it is interesting. But like, it's just there. You mentioned the whole thing about how animation, it can be just as effective emotionally as anything else. I mean, we look at something like Inside Out. That, I mean, and I'm not just saying this. I mean, that film really. I mean, I don't have any kids or anything. My sister has a kid, and I see how that character acts is how my little cousin or my little niece acts, and the real connection between the two. So I suppose my question to you is, I mean, you're somebody that's been working in animation since the 90s, and you've really, you were there at the birth of Pixar and all that. I mean, what's your take on it now? I mean, has it become, obviously it's become a bit more demystified and so on, but does it still have the same, what's the word? Is it still true? Is it still real? Is it still true? I mean, does it still have context?
I saw Inside Out, and I do think that the premise of it was really powerful. It's sort of like moving to a new place and not having your stuff and all that. And then it sort of lost me, partly because I just seen Song of the Sea right before it in the movie theater. And that kind of shook my world. And I took my daughter to go see it, and I was crying. And it affected me emotionally, and it felt like I thought it was a kid's film, but I came out of it going like, no, it's a film for adults that kids can like, because it's really about loss and everything. And I thought it's so, and they're Irish. We did all the animation for Last Hijack in Dublin.
Really?
So, I spent the whole year here.
Fuck.
I worked with a production company here called Still Films.
And
also the company that did the animation is Piranha Bar. And so I spent basically a whole year here in Dublin, and we did all the animation for Last Hijack here. So this is why this is like such a great return to have this sort of the screening here, because it's really such a part of the, you know, of the production.
I don't know if you know this, but like Ireland does have a really strong animation thing.
Yeah,
we had Murakami Wolf back in the 80s when we did like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and all that. So I didn't realize that it was animated here. But I mean, okay, just to keep it on, you know, animation and so on and so forth. I mean, one of your earliest works was, you created the world's first machinima, which is a film that was made inside a video game.
Yeah.
I mean, that's become quite big business now, hasn't it?
Well, I didn't create Machinima. Machinima was sort of created by gamers, really, sort of like doing run-throughs and all that stuff. And again, it was sort of like that garage attitude of like not having to have a lot of money and have the
work with what you got.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if the thing is, like, if the more resources you have, the more pressures that you're under and all that stuff. And the idea of I'm pretty lazy, so like the Machinima seemed great. Like, you don't have to render, you can change it around. It's a virtual environment, and I always knew that eventually that the hardware and the software will catch up, and that 3D animation will be just like that anyway. But I was lucky enough, you know, id Software comes out of Texas, and I reached out to them, and John Carmack, who was the programmer, helped do some stuff and made it easier for us to be able to make something. And for that, the challenge really was like, can we take this sort of like I was a big fan of Doom and Quake and all those things. And they're sort of very violent, but I just loved walking around in the world, you know, and like I was sort of like, I felt like I was getting distracted by all the shooting and stuff. I was sort of amazed that I could just go around.
You could go wherever you wanted.
I mean, really sort of virtual reality back then, and it was immersive, you know, and I felt like, and then I thought like, well, I wanted to do this. I'd done a music video for 07 and for Destiny, and it did really well, and that song was a huge hit, and they were coming out with a follow-up, and I just thought, well, why don't we take the sort of the engine of the sort of ultra violent game where it's just sort of about kill or be killed, and let's make sort of something really different.
Poetic almost.
Yeah. And so it was really like that, showing the flexibility of that engine but also of that platform, and that was a long time ago too.
I mean, have you seen where it's gone to now? Like, I mean, do you keep up with it? I mean, or is it just a case of I did it now and that's kind of me done?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been keeping up with Machinima as much then. I mean, in many ways, I think a lot of the VR is sort of approaching the same issues.
Well, that was what I was going to say.
We're going right there, and I think that virtual reality isn't quite. It's very good at sort of like putting you into an environment and sort of experiencing that right now. But as a storytelling platform, it'll develop a little bit more. I'm super excited about AR, augmented reality, and mixed reality. I think that once you start taking in a very believable way the world around you, and then being able to insert
and to be able to
into it, like that's, I think, going to be incredibly powerful. But VR, you just completely shut off. Yeah, and there's something isolating about that. There's something that you know, that I think that when you tell stories, you want to be connecting with people, and maybe that's good in terms of creating an experience or empathizing with a different situation. But I don't know how well it connects you with people yet. So
it's interesting.
Yeah,
because it's funny. Like, I mean, I would look at something like Oculus Rift and VR and so on and so forth. I mean, it's a delivery system, and it's kind of like, you know, in a cinema, you're kind of locking yourself into a room, aren't you? You know, that sort of way. So like, if it's VR, it's locking it onto your face.
But you're locking yourself into a room with a crowd is always a little bit better than being by yourself.
True.
And that's really the power of theater, is that even that there's a collective emotion that goes to it. And you can go see the same movie and you can have a different experience because the crowd is different.
True.
With different people. And I think that there's something just so basic instinct about humanity that we want to hear stories and collectively go through that. And I think like if like Martin Scorsese was sitting here, we both would be in awe.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Because he is a master storyteller. Yeah. And somewhere deep down, we know that a person who tells stories is an incredibly powerful person, and we treat them like, you know, we treat them like that. And there's something about that, I think, that we shouldn't dismiss, that the power of narrative, the power of telling stories is modern day magic in a way.
It's really interesting. Okay, final question. I mean, what are you working on next? I mean, do you have anything lined up? I mean, is it a case of now you've done this?
Yeah. You know, I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm kind of at the point where I've had some projects gestating for a very long period of time, and you always kind of like wait, like, well, when is the right time? It feels like I want to make a movie about Bill Hicks. And
Bill Hicks, really?
Yeah, I'm Texan, and I know his producer Kevin Booth, and I just always really he came from the suburbs of where I came from. Similar story, and I think that right now that's sort of exciting to me. I want to do another animated feature, and kind of in the early stages of that, talking to folks around here in Dublin about that.
I want to quiz you on Bill Hicks. Yeah. Okay, I'll put you on the spot now.
Let's do it.
Who would you cast as Bill Hicks? If you're let's say you're given carte blanche, you've got unlimited resources. Who would you cast as Bill Hicks?
An unknown.
Really?
Yeah.
You wouldn't like to see like an actor kind of take it on and transform.
No, because I think that I've thought about this a lot, and originally I talked to Russell Crowe. He was going to play Bill Hicks for a while, and I had a hard time. I mean, I think Russell Crowe's a great actor, and I would love to work with him and put him in any possible movie. But I had a hard time imagining him being Bill Hicks because he has such a strong identity already.
Yeah.
Right? And it would always be like, oh, well, that's Russell Crowe playing
Bill Hicks. Yeah.
And in America, Bill Hicks isn't very well known.
That's right. He's more well known this side.
Yeah. And so I think that for it to be successful, I always talk about like Raging Bull. Was like nobody knew who Jake LaMotta was
until it was kind of done,
right. And you didn't have to be a boxing fan to really enjoy that movie. That you have to sort of tap into this emotional thing. And Robert De Niro at that time wasn't Robert De Niro that we have now and everything. And so like I think that's a great example of like a biopic that sort of transcends the subject matter in a way. It becomes something more universal and becomes sort of tragic in like a Greek sense.
Yeah.
And De Niro, especially at that time, was able to really dissolve into the characters.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like now he can never do it because everybody knows like Robert De Niro. We all can do impressions of him and everything. But at that moment in his career, he was still able to dissolve into it. And I think that it would need somebody who could dissolve into a character that doesn't bring the sort of the baggage that comes with it. I mean, like there's like, I'm sure that if I go pitch this in Hollywood, there'd be like Ryan Gosling or
something
whatever.
Like
that. To me, they're too identifiable. They're too strong already. And I think that if the story of Bill Hicks it goes beyond even just the person Bill Hicks.
Yeah.
And that for it to be successful, it has to be about something much more and without the distractions. So
it's interesting. I mean, do you see Bill Hicks as a tragic character?
Well, he died tragically young.
Yeah.
And he had something to say, and
you don't think he was finished saying it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, he left us a great gift, you know, but I mean, the last 6 months of his life, he didn't really tell people that he was dying, and that was sort of really interesting to me. Like, and I started thinking to myself, well, what would if I was making a movie, would I tell people that I'm dying?
Yeah.
And I don't think I would. I think that I would do the same thing that he did and just try to finish everything that I had started and try to leave something behind. And, there's a sort of an existential truth to that we all know that we're dying, but it's something that we all sort of are in denial about all the time. And we have to ask ourselves, well, what are we going to be leaving behind and what do we truly want to say? And I think that, in the last 6 months of life, he finished like 2 albums. He mixed them all together. He was like writing all kinds of stuff. He was like all over the place. And I think that that's sort of an uplifting story. You know? And the fact that he
was rushing to the end, like
he's gone, but in a way he's still with us very much so.
Absolutely. So, we're still talking about him now.
It's tragic, it's sad, but it's also very hopeful, and it's what you want in a story. It's sort of, it has that full spectrum.
It's really interesting. Look, listen, I'll go see it the day it comes out. I love Bill Hicks, so I would definitely go see it when it comes out. Okay, Tommy Palotta, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.